what is our response going to be, especially as young Catholics?
Because today's youth is tomorrow's future. And both good people and bad people understand that. So we count on you. The Church, Our Lady, Heaven counts on you.
It's also wonderful to see events like this where there is a sense of community, a sense of being around people who understand you and who are trying to live the same kind of life and build the same kind of world that you are.
Welcome to Church and State with Chris Ferrara and Brian McCall, where we catalog the events in Church and State, which have never been so united in their direction towards insanity as in any time in human history.
That's about it. That's a wrap up. We can go now.
As always, though, we don't just wrap it there. We actually do talk about things. We're here in the beginning of May 2020.
That's such a way with words, Brian, you know?
Exactly. I learned from you. Learned from the best. Well, we're going to start in the state. We're the beginning of May. And kind of a really interesting story has unfolded in the state of Arizona. So the state of Arizona's Supreme Court ruled that the law that outlawed essentially all abortions, all elective, all abortions that had been passed in the state of Arizona, even before it was a state, back when it was a territory, had never been repealed. It had been stayed due to the decision of Roe v. Wade, but now that that decision was overruled, that law is still on the books and could be enforced. This enraged, as you might guess, the pro-abortion leftists, and so they went on a campaign to repeal this law. And just this past week, first the House and the state, and then the Senate repealed that law. It was signed by the governor just recently. This action was done by all Democratic members and a handful of Republicans who voted to do so. So before we would talk about it, I do want to point out one interesting hypocrisy of the left, because for many years they've been trying to put forward this narrative that, oh, everybody always had a right to abortion. This restriction on abortion was kind of a modern blip in history. In fact, there really weren't laws against abortion for a long time, which is just historically untrue. So they play that card. But then when it's to their advantage, all they've been doing this past few weeks is wailing and gnashing their teeth that this law is so old. It goes back to before the Civil War. It's so old that they kind of are admitting that abortion laws are really old. I just find it funny that they're just so hypocritical. The laws are new when they want them to be. They're old when they want to claim we should get rid of them. But I think a sad day for Arizona, and particularly I think a sad day for these Republicans who voted to now strike down this law that would have stopped abortions. But what do you think, Chris? Do you think it's a sad day?
Well, morally speaking, it's obviously a sad day. Objectively speaking, obviously a sad day. There should be no abortions anywhere in the United States. It should be outlawed everywhere as murder and treated accordingly, even if the penalty for a woman might be different than outright homicide of a person who happens to be walking around. In both cases, a person is murdered, but typically abortionists have been prosecuted and not women. So there should be no abortions and there should be prosecutions for abortion. But politics being the art of the possible, a consideration comes into view. Some Republicans voted for this. Now, why? Well, Arizona is a swing state, key state for the upcoming election. It is only because a certain person was elected in 2016 that Roe versus Wade was overturned in the first place. He kept that promise. So if Arizona is lost because of this bill, which probably would not be enforced anyway, practically speaking, then the prospects for 2024 dim for the Republican Party. So in a sense, and I'm not defending the repeal, I'm just saying there's a prudential consideration here. This was a big issue for the Democrats. I would almost think that a lot of Democrats did not want this law to be repealed because it would be a major talking point for them, because all they've really got is more, better baby killing. That's their platform. Kill more babies, continue legalizing sodomy, transgender surgery for minors, drag queen story hour, any manner of perversion. That's their platform. And this is the same throughout the Western world in terms of liberalism, which has entered its final decadent phase. So they really actually loved this law in a sense. They wanted to be able to talk about it. Now they can't. And I'll bet if you look around on the internet, you'll find some Democrat commentators saying maybe it's not such a good idea that this law was repealed. And Trump has been taken to task for saying a law like this is problematic for the Republican platform. And in a sense, you have to see what he's talking about. Because if we don't have a major change in the executive branch in the next election, we will be living in a police state. There's a little doubt of that.
Well, again, I agree with you. I think we're already, or at least some people or parts of the country are living in a police state already, but it will only get worse. So I agree with that. I'm going to push back a little bit here. I mean, I think...
I see why. Go right ahead.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, as to saying, well, it wouldn't be enforced, yes, I agree. The Attorney General, who's horrible, said, I'm not going to enforce this. But she admitted that local prosecutors were free to bring cases under this law, and some of them indicated they would. So again, I'm not so sure that it would have not been enforced at all. And on the political level, even, I'm going to say, I'm not really sure it helps. I mean, I get your point. It takes away a talking point from Democrats, but I'm sure it really helps Republicans. I mean, I don't think this is going to appease some radical abortionist people, some radical liberals who are going to vote Democrat anyway. Now say, oh, because you helped us out with this one vote, we're going to vote for you, Republican. I just don't, I'm not sure. And frankly, it's why I've been critical of President Trump's stand that is, let's do the 15-week ban. It's a nice compromise.
Oh, well, that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, you're not going to ever please these people.
First of all, that is a disastrous idea. The idea that the federal government would get involved in imposing any sort of, quote, ban on abortion, which will not be a total ban.
Yeah.
What that's going to do is raise an issue of federal preemption.
Yep.
So if the federal government comes in and says, well, once the heart begins to beat 15 weeks or so, maybe even earlier, 12 weeks, then you can't have any abortion anywhere in the United States. Well, first of all, it's going to be challenged in federal court. Probably half a dozen district judges will strike it down. But in the meantime, they'll take the same law and they'll say, federal preemption. Federal government has preempted the field. So any state law that's more restrictive than this must be in violation of federal preemption doctrine. I don't know if that argument would fly, but I don't think the federal government should have anything to do with this issue, which is the whole point in reversing Roe. Because in our system, the best we can hope for, since we don't have a mass democracy of 250 million voters that can do a referendum on anything, the best we can hope for is that state by state, you'll see a repeal. And I see your point about Arizona. Yeah. My only argument there is maybe in Arizona, which is a swing state, enough independents will be mollified that they won't vote against Trump for that reason. That could make a big difference if he wins the state by 10,000 votes. But I see your point too. So your pushback, I'm not so sure it's really pushback. I'm making the argument for purposes of raising an issue.
And again, I take your point. I mean, I don't think any Democrats or even some really committed abortion people who are independent are going to vote for a Republican or Donald Trump for this reason, but it might mean they just stay home, right? If they're I'm not really sure about this election, I don't really like anybody, they might stay home. But if they get energized because of their abortion views, because of something in Arizona, maybe it'll push them to vote rather than not vote. So again, I'll concede that. Ultimately, though, I come back to these Republicans. I think even if those political calculations were there, I think on an issue of this moral depth, that you maybe look at the political, but I think you just have to do the right thing in the end. And ultimately, I think you're going to succeed politically if you stick true to your principles on things that are absolutes. And again, abortion is an intrinsic evil when intended. And I think it's an absolute. And no matter what the political fallout, I think a vote in this way was the wrong thing.
Yeah. Now, of course, the problem with the Republican position the so-called even the absolutist quote unquote Republican
Right.
position has exceptions
Yes.
for rape and incest. So there is no actual political party platform that calls for the total abolition of murder in the womb. And this is the problem with American politics and Western politics in general, because we don't want to just focus on the United States. The problem with Western politics in general is its relative moral depravity. So the strategy of the conservatives, whether they're nationalists or pro-lifers, is mitigation of harm. That's all we can do at this point. Mitigate harm through the common good. And that's what we're left with. And that's what our duty is, to the extent that it's possible. We try to mitigate harm. And we have to understand, and this is something I was talking about with a family member not long ago, just how rapidly and how far this country has declined in less than a lifetime. Yeah. If you look back to the 1950s, 1952 to 1957, one of the most popular TV shows was Life is Worth Living with Bishop Sheen, who won an Emmy Award for Most Outstanding TV Personality. In the 1950s, Father Peyton and his Rosary Crusade were wildly popular in America. And there was a big Hollywood gala honoring Father Peyton and his work for the church. And all the Hollywood glitterati were at this big dinner to honor Father Peyton. And the movies had Catholic priests as heroes. And there was a League of Decency, which was telling Catholics, everyone really, certain movies should not be seen. They were off limits. What do we see today? Is there even a glimmer of hope that anyone like Father Peyton could be honored today, or that a show like Life is Worth Living with Bishop Sheen would have any viewership at all? There's been a free fall in 60 or 70 years, the likes of which probably hasn't been seen, and I'm alluding here to Benedict's address when he was Pope, since the fall of the Roman Empire.
Wow. That's pretty dramatic. But I mean, you're right, though. It inconceivable. And I would say you don't even have to go to 1952. I think it's, in early 2000s, if you would tell some people what's going on right now, what is come into the quote mainstream, they would laugh. They would say that's impossible that could happen. Frankly, if you could in 2000 tell someone every state would be issuing marriages licenses to people of the same sex to quote claim they're married, they would say no, never. That's never going to happen. And so it has. But I agree with you on the Republican Party. Utter inconsistency on this issue in the platform. But I'd like to ask you your legal opinion. When you went and said, I agree with you, that this 15-week federal thing would be disastrous for the reasons you say. But what about a different federal action? Again, positing the likelihood of getting 60 senators to get it passed is is not in foreseeable future, but a simple law saying all people from the moment of conception are deemed U.S. citizens entitled to all constitutional rights. What do you think the federal government did that?
In the book that I wrote on the subject of liberty, I have a whole section on that, how the protection of life, the deprivation of life is not permitted without due process of law. The Fifth Amendment protection applied to the states via the 14th Amendment should extend to people in the womb. But as Justice Scalia infamously said in his interview on ABC with Diane Sawyer, in his view, the 14th Amendment applies only to walking around people. Now, where he got that from, I don't know. Certainly nothing to do with originalism. That's just his opinion. Common law, the whole common law tradition, and even the common law tradition in America recognized children in the womb as lives in being. The rule against perpetuities was calculated based upon a life in being in the womb. By the way, I think there was a decision in California that said if you screw up the rule against perpetuities, it's not even legal malpractice.
Nobody can be expected to know that. Sorry, inside joke for people in the law school.
So yes, that there should be a federal law declaring that and affording the 14th Amendment via the Fifth Amendment protections to lives in being at all stages. Yeah. And also, of course, the constitutional amendment, which has been floating around for 40 years now?
Yeah.
The right to life amendment, that will never pass in this country now. It's too far gone. It might have passed in the 50s, but then back in the 50s, no one even conceived of this situation.
Well, exactly. Well, it's interesting. We'll see, and it really does remind us that what Dobbs v. Jackson Women Health did is it made it even more important who's on your state Supreme Court. Because again, the Arizona Supreme Court, we can't blame them; they did their job. But who's your governor? Who's your representative? Your senator? To be honest, a lot of races that some people just gloss over, don't even give a second thought to. But what the power of that decision was, it returned it to those people to decide what's going to happen in your state for good or evil. And, we'll end this on a positive note for good. The same week that this happened in Arizona, in Florida, a prohibition of abortion after the sixth week became enforceable in Florida. So it had been passed several years ago, but the Florida Supreme Court was brought a case challenging it under the Florida's Constitution. They ruled that it was perfectly fine from a constitutional perspective, and it went into force on May 1st, to the wailing and gnashing of teeth of the baby killers who weren't able to carry on their butchery in the third largest state in the country. So it really matters who holds these state offices.
Well, that reflects, though, another limitation on what we can do politically in this country. The law that you're talking about in Florida passed, but it passed not on the basis of a strict moral principle, but on the basis of the emotional argument that past a certain point, abortion is just, icky. It's just icky because a heart is beating. Well, you can't kill a human being when the heart is beating. Well, when can you ever kill a human being, whether the heart is beating or not? So, okay, we'll take what we can get, but still the moral principle is not being recognized. And that reminds you of the great observation of Alistair McIntyre in his book, After Virtue, that we live in an emotivist age. It's no longer a question of the virtues as such, of strict moral principles as such, but what you can appeal to people with on the basis of emotion. All arguments are emotional now. And even arguments about the right to life are based too much on emotion as opposed to the negative precepts of the natural law handed down to us from above by the God who made us and who sustains everything in existence.
Well, you're right. I mean, we do live in the sad legacy of David Hume, who essentially wanted to reduce all morality to passions and feeling, which led to emotivism, which is really the root cause. Absolutely right. As you always do, you go right to the heart of the matter.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, there's this Russian philosopher denounced as a fascist and a right-wing lunatic, Drugin, who basically says we've reached not only the stage at which humanity is denied in its created nature as a substance endowed with certain characteristics that are ineradicable by God. Now we've reached the transhumanist stage in which humanity itself will be optional. I choose not to be a human. I'm going to be a cyborg.
Right. Wow.
We talk about this in every episode, but it's the end stage.
It is.
I don't know how the end stage will finally terminate, but when empires fall, it's usually some catastrophe, some war, some invasion from out without. Although, as McIntyre says, and After Virtue, the barbarians are within the gates. We're being ruled by them.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
I don't know how this will all end, but Our Lady of Fatima always reminds us that when all seems hopeless, and this is how we end every episode, that's when the restoration will begin. But meanwhile, there's a problem in the church as well.
Meanwhile, I'm talking about an absurdity. So when I talk about in Germany, there's a diocesan youth group that's in the Diocese of Munster, which in the past had been placed under the patronage of St. Thomas More, that great English saint who's actually remembered on the traditional calendar tomorrow. Leo XIII raised him and St. John Fisher to the altars as great Catholic martyrs. Tomorrow, the day after we're recording this, which would be May 3rd, he does get a mention in the martyrology. But this group, apparently, those young people were taken on a trip to England to learn about St. Thomas More. Presumably they went to his cell in the Tower of London. But interestingly, they came away saying, wait a minute, we don't think he's a good guy. They said, his opinions clash with the values of our youth group. And the reasons they gave for this is he persecuted supporters of the Reformation, And he was canonized because of his opposition to divorce, which stopped the king from getting another marriage. And they then declared that this saint, quote, stood up for the old values of the Catholic Church. So after this trip, they took a vote, 42-1, 42 in favor, to say, resolved, Thomas More is not a nice dude.
What?
And then asked the diocese to get rid of him as their patron. I mean, this is
the insolent youth of Germany. Okay, so now, as always, to counterbalance all of this bad news with a note of hope, what do we find but that according to the AP, in the United States, and this is also true in Europe, by the way, parishes are in turmoil as traditionalism sweeps the U.S. Catholic Church. It's an Associated Press story. And the theme of the story is young people have had it with the old fogies and their trendy nonsense who are all in their 70s and 80s, and they want orthodoxy, which, according to this article, leaves them sometimes at odds with Pope Francis and much of the Catholic world. Pope Francis, by the way, who's always talking about newness, is actually an old fogey clinging to the old ways of Vatican II. So these young people want the new ways, which is the old way, the ageless way. For as St. Augustine said of the church is ever ancient and ever new. She has a timeless liturgy and timeless teachings that don't change. The fancy word for all of this is anachronic. What the church offers spans all ages and is the same in all ages because God is the same in all ages. He doesn't have trendy ideas. He doesn't change his mind. And young people are saying, this is nonsense. Guitars and the hootenanny at Mass. We want the real thing. And this whole AP article is about young people everywhere in the United States looking for orthodoxy. And according to this article, Francis views this as a dangerous reactionary trend in the American Catholic Church. But it's a hopeful trend because the Holy Ghost is at work, of course. That's the trump card in all of this, that the church is actually under the influence at all times in all ages of the Holy Ghost. And the very existence of the church maintained through all these centuries is a work of the Holy Ghost. And we're seeing it now with young people.
And you're right. It's a deeper trend than just the liturgical or the aesthetic, because as the article points out, there is certainly a movement among youth, and all you have to do is walk into almost any location. I won't say church anymore since they're getting put out of their churches, but any location where the traditional Latin Mass is offered, and you will see true diversity of age, right? You will see lots of young people sitting in pews and, alongside older people, as opposed to, empty pews with elderly people, as you'll find in most Novus Ordo locations. But it's more than that. As the article points out, it's attachment to traditional Catholic morality, whether that involves contraception, abortion, or other related issues, that they're saying that that's what they want. They're sort of you said the end game. It's sort of the end stage. It's really the end stage of the summer of love, right? The summer of love. You can do all this stuff without consequences. It doesn't matter. Live it up. Sin boldly. This generation, younger, are seeing it was a lie, right? That it was false on so many levels. Because another story I saw this week that was interesting is a big movement among young people, teenagers, early 20s, against the birth control pill. Now, again, not even on the realm of morality at the Catholic point, but just a lot of young, maybe even non-religious people who are just saying, this has been a bunch of lies. I go around, it's funny, there was one person who was interviewed who said, I'm really interested in healthy, organic food. I don't eat GMO. But then I realized my doctor is having me pump myself with a bunch of hormones that are made in a lab. Again, that's not a religious awakening, but it's at least an awakening that the bill of goods you've been sold isn't what it was purported to be.
You could say even that's a sign of the operation of ordinary grace, because as our Lord said, without me, you can do nothing. So even on a natural level, exercising purely natural virtue, the concern for health, you see a rebellion. But this AP article, people who are watching this should listen to this passage from it about young priests. And this is really reason for hope. Young priests driven by liberal politics and progressive theology, so common in the 1960s and 70s, have all but vanished, said a 2023 report from the Catholic Project at Catholic University, based on a survey of 3,500 priests. Today's young priests are far more likely to believe that the church changed too much after Vatican II, tangling itself up in America's rapidly shifting views on everything, from women's roles to LGBTQ people. Quote, says the article, quoting someone, "There really aren't very many liberals in the seminaries anymore," said a young, recently ordained Midwestern priest. He spoke on condition of anonymity. So, yeah, really, the young priesthood today is not the priesthood of Vatican II, as much as Francis would like it to be in his last days on earth.
No,
that's over. The only question is how much time it will take to mop up this disaster area that they've turned the church into.
Well, and as the analogy you use in your book, The Great Facade, I mean, the body of Christ has been infected with a virus. The turning point has come. The church has sort of stopped self-infecting itself, right? And it's going to take time to purge the effects of that virus out of its system. And that you're still sick, but you're on your road to recovery.
I think the physical embodiment of this dying off of the horrific results of Vatican II is seen in the current occupant of the chair of Peter. I mean, visually, you can see the wages of this trend, which is death for the faith. The wages of innovation, reckless innovation for the church, is death in those areas of the church which embraced it. And only where the church has retained tradition, even something proximate to tradition, it's thriving, let alone with the Latin Mass. Just conservative Novus Ordo parishes are bursting at the seams. So people want the real thing. You can't deny them the real thing. It's kind of the equivalent of the health food craze. In the secular realm, within the church, people want healthy worship. They want the faith, the healthy faith that was handed down to them from the time of the apostles. And they're going to find it wherever it can be found.
Absolutely. Again, we have our Lord's own words that the gates of hell will not prevail, and therefore, there will be this renaissance in the church that we can, do whatever in our sphere of influence to support by our prayers and actions. So,
and it's a good way to live. It's a healthy way to live according to the faith, to avoid birth control, to have a large family, to fill up the table of life with as many souls as possible, which are blessings from God. All of this makes people happy. Does that mean you have no suffering in your life? Of course not. You will have suffering. But the suffering is mitigated by the grace of God and living the right way. My burden is easy and my yoke is light. I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. That's what our Lord said. He wants us to have happy lives, not miserable lives. And the people who shun the teaching of the church looking for what they think is happiness, they're the ones who are miserable.
Absolutely. They are the ones. And really, you have to just really, I think, ultimately be sorry for them, because their time is over. They know it is. And they're just sort of the dying gasps. And I'll end with kind of one final image of this, which is a story we don't have time to talk about, obviously. But in Germany as well, this past week, there was a Mass of the Deaconesses that was organized by the lay group that participates in the German synodal way. That's done so much. The lay group that's so much behind that. They sponsored this Mass. Let's see if I can blow up the picture. There it is. To celebrate deaconesses. And I mean, they're self-proclaimed clowns. I mean, I'm not calling that. They're presenting themselves as clowns. So they did a clown dance to celebrate. And if you just look at them all, do these people look happy to you?
Well, first of all, you have the women with the frosted hair, and you have the lady with the clown nose. So this is what I would call the final paroxysm of ecclesial rabies. They're thrashing around in the depths of their terminal insanity, getting crazier and crazier. They're a parody of themselves.
Yes.
The cliche is you can't make this stuff up. You can't.
You can't. So laugh, say a prayer for them that they wake up before their time is past, and go make a First Saturday. So that's the best advice I can give you.
Well, I agree. As I said in the last episode, I'm in the middle of 5 right now. Let's hope I complete the 5. And also, we should ask our viewers to pray for the soul of Father John Hunnick.
Yes.
He was a regular at the Lake Garda event of the Roman Forum every year. Wonderful English priest. He came into the church through the Anglican Ordinariate. The Oxford gentleman par excellence, wit, erudition, everything. He was always a delight to listen to and to be with. And he's passed on at the age of something like 80 or so. So pray for him. He was a great contributor to the traditionalist movement and the restoration that will surely happen sooner or later.
Certainly. Pray for his soul. And on that note, we'll bid you farewell and hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Take care. God bless.